name's Jackie Huggins and I'm an Aboriginal woman from Australia, Brisbane, Australia. I am here today to talk about the reconciliation process that we have in our country, and also to talk a bit about the history and background of Aboriginal people, both in the past and in contemporary times. Well, it's very nice to be this far, but always, wherever I go, I always, like we do back home in my own country, I want to acknowledge the custodians of your country and people who have come here since, to the elders, past and present. I bring greetings from Aboriginal Australia to you all. It's my first time in Australia, actually. In Australia, oh, where am I? Not there yet. In Ireland, and you know, it's a place I've always wanted to. As I was saying, you Irish people are so loved around the world. And in fact, in my own country, we have Aboriginal Irish Aboriginals. They have names like Carmody. Is Carmody Irish or is that Scottish? Okay, yeah. And we got O'Shanes, O'Connells, O'Farrells, Doyles, a whole host of them. Sadly for me, I don't know where my white blood comes from, but I do pray it's Irish. So let me talk about that a little bit. In terms of my background, I come from a place called Brisbane, which is an hour and a plane north of Sydney. Everyone knows Sydney, so Brisbane's this wonderful place. I'm known as a Murray because that's what we call ourselves there as Aboriginal people. In in New South Wales, so Sydney, they call themselves Koris, and so it goes. We also have our term for white people, which are Migaloos, in my part of the country, and you have Ballanders in the west and Gubbars in New South Wales and so forth. We're quite a small population. We average about 2.5% of Australia's population of 22 million. But we have survived. We have survived despite a very brutal history in our country, an almost annihilation, a wipeout or attempted assimilation of our people. We've had government policy in our country that has failed us dismally for the past 40, 50 years in terms of contemporary stuff. We're very much a proud people, and we still are very much proud people. We have been known to be in our country, as archaeologists have put us, between 40,000 and 60,000 years. But up in the Kimberley, in the northwest of Australia, there have been some rock art paintings, but there was smudging on it, and they couldn't really verify that it might have been 120,000 years of existence. We're very old. We're one of the oldest cultures on the planet that are still surviving, and I'm very proud of the fact. And it's nice when I go away to overseas countries and people applaud that and say it's all very fine, but when I go back home I'm usually subjected to the same old humiliation and racism that presents itself regularly to myself, no matter that I'm a professor or a doctor, have been for many years at university, or I'm the co-chair of I was the co-chair of Reconciliation Australia, and also on the Council for Aboriginal Reconciliation for about 6 years when it started. But that's all kind of, it's very interesting, I guess, you know, how people see you in different countries, and you go home and you face the same old second-rate citizen of your country. I have mixed feelings about my place in my country. Sometimes it's very joyous, and I'm an optimist, totally optimist. And next day I'm very pessimistic because I've just heard about another racial vilification or a death that's been meted out to my people. throughout our pretty, sordid history. So I kind of find myself in between this, yes, I'm very strong and positive, and no, I hate the brutality that still exists for my people there. I think Susan said to me this morning, so in this day and age, how is it for your people? It's still pretty damn hard. It really is. I mean, no longer are we shot or poisoned as we were on the frontier, like our good friends, the Native American Indians. We share a very similar history to them in terms of appropriation of land, appropriation of culture. We were put onto missions and reserves. In fact, my mother comes from an Aboriginal reserve called Cherbourg, which is 3 hours north of Brisbane, northwest of Brisbane. And she was rounded up from her country in central Queensland and put on the back of a cattle train and sent to Cherbourg Aboriginal Mission. Now, because she was what they call in those days half-caste or light-skinned, she was sent to Cherbourg while her other relatives were put in a place called Warrabinda, which is another Aboriginal reserve about maybe 3 hours northwest of Brisbane. So it's about 6 hours away. Because they were black-skinned, they were fairly traditional. On the basis of skin colour, they were put there. Aboriginal people were thought of as easy to assimilate, easy to get into white culture. We were colonised by the British, as you know, and we were confined to places like missions and reserves to keep us out of sight, out of mind. And this is all within living memory of my people. Now, the missions, of course, people were denied to speak their customs, their language, denied their customs, denied everything to do with their identity as Aboriginal people. So unfortunately, I know about 100 words of my local language. That language is a thing called Bidjara and Birigabajuru, which is my mother's language mostly. My father's from the north of Queensland, a place called, guess where I was born? Ayr. And hello, there's an Ayr in Scotland, isn't there? And my mother comes from that place of Cherbourg, which Cherbourg is in France. So it's probably on my bucket list next time to go and visit those two places, Ayr and thing. But I always make sure I put, on the passport and stuff, Ayr, North Queensland, not Ayr, Scotland. So it's amazing, but we of course, we imported a lot of things from your countries, the UK, especially the convicts and other people that came down that way. And there's also, it's very, people are very proud now to find their convict heritage in our country. It's a big thing, But still, they're not so proud as they are to find out that you have Aboriginal relatives, in fact. As I said, I don't know who my white side or where that comes from, because my history is part of being raised by a very strong Aboriginal mother and father who both had white parentage somewhere back there, but we can't find it because Aboriginal babies were never registered at birth. And of course, they were denied, obviously, the parentage of their white fathers and grandfathers and so forth. So nobody's really ever come to claim me. If they have, there were a couple of times actually people said, "Oh, you that Huggins, the activist, from Queensland," and I'd say, "Yes." And we might be related to you and so forth. And there was one recently. It was just about last year. And this woman said to me, "Are you Jackie Huggins?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, my daughter recently went to Ayr and put some flowers on your father's and your grandfather's and your grandmother's grave. They were both military people actually. My grandfather fought in World War One. He was injured twice in Belgium but came home. And my father was a prisoner of war in the Burma-Thailand Railway. That railway was never built, and as a consequence he came back pretty shattered, but 2 years later he met and married my mum, and then they had 3 children, but he died 7 years later. He was 38. So post-traumatic stress in those days was unheard of. People really didn't know what that was about. So he died of a massive stroke and heart attack when I was just 2 years of age. So my parents were very, very strong influences in my life, and my mother always taught me not to hate white people. Well, it didn't really sink into my mind until I was probably in my 30s when I started not hating white people for what had happened to our people, you know, the whole history. I went back and I studied history at the University of Queensland, of where I stayed, and I taught for many years. She said, don't hate white people because it's a negative emotion. You hate white people, you're hating part of yourself, even though you don't know that part of yourself, which is likely British, but you know, you should never hate people. It really didn't dawn on me till I joined the Reconciliation Council when I was about 36 years of age in 1996. And I started to realise that, you know, white fellas got a story too. It's just not about us. In every race, I think we're all quite ethnocentric in terms of how we think we've got the best race and all that. But this thing with white fellas was still very much part of my whole distance, I guess. Some people may not know that I was never born as a citizen of my own country in Australia. After 60,000 years of occupation, I wasn't born a citizen. I was 11 years of age in 1967 when we became citizens of our country. That's Aboriginal people. So my sisters and brothers weren't born. Certainly my son, of course, is now a citizen of our own country. So these are the things that really held us back. We were kind of, it was a bit like the laws in South Africa were very much mirrored on the laws of Queensland in terms of the apartheid system. So it was out of sight, out of mind system, and you weren't, you know, we were shunted off into the missions and reserves and really imbued with senses of assimilation, and there was an assimilation policy in our country which never worked because it made our people stronger. It made us look to ways that we could express ourselves much more vibrantly through the arts, particularly through all the stuff that we do. Today, it's a different story in terms of our young people are being university educated. They have, I was saying to a couple of the gentlemen, you know, we have a few young fellas at my university, my previous university, who are studying to be astronautical engineers, I think that's the term, you know, but and some want to be astronauts. We have about 150 GPs, medical doctors. We've probably got about 200 lawyers now in our country. My nephew is actually a barrister, and his father-in-law is the governor of Queensland now. So, you know, we're kind of moving along in sort of social mobility has increased somewhat for some of us, but for the majority of Aboriginal people, it's hardly changed. We have the fastest growing population. We have a lot of teenage pregnancies, young people being mothers and fathers for the first time. We have, in a very rich country, we are still the poorest. We have the worst forms of our forms of education are still very low, although there are some excellent achievements happening. We have the worst employment in the country. We have the worst health the worst health from all the population. In fact, our longevity rate has, if I was talking to you 10 years ago, I would have been saying to you we die 20 years less than that of other Australians. But I'm talking to you now, and I'm glad to say the figure has come to 11 years less. That's still not anywhere near the parity that we see in other Indigenous races around the world, like the Native Americans, Canadians, the Maoris, who've actually just about on parity now with their fellow countrymen and their countrywomen. Why is this so? There's been for a long time in our country inaccessibilities to hospitals. We still have diseases that we still carry with us genetically. We have we could have all been wiped out with the smallpox epidemic that swept our countries, the venereal diseases on contact after contact times, but we still survive. We still have this deep sense of pride and identity that we carry forward with us. We practice our own spiritual beliefs still through our stories that have been handed down to us. We've come from an oral culture, so we do a lot of storytelling. There's a lot of stories that are transmitted down. That's our culture. It's been very oral up until recent times, of course, when we've decided to write and to write that down. We have a number of flourishing authors who have had made international success. We have the artists and singers and so forth as well that continue to embrace but never leave or never deny their culture. I wanted to tell you also about the stolen generation. Some people have asked me about that, and that was a policy in 1997. The Australian government made a Royal Commission into the separation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from their families. I was a commissioner for Queensland, and I met with the two male commissioners who came through, and we sat on the inquiry to look at the children who had been taken away, people now in their 60s and 70s, some as young as in their 40s still and 50s, who had been taken off their parents out of their Aboriginal communities and attempted to be assimilated into orphanages, homes, and with white people, solely on the basis that they were Aboriginal, because we wanted. There was a quote from one of the great anthropologists about soothing the dying pillow, and this was about wiping out the Aboriginal race. So what the government did was to get young Aboriginal children into those foster homes and homes, orphanages, to really wipe out the race, to really assimilate in a way, to enable them to become white people, good white people. You can imagine the trauma of that. These Aboriginal kids sometimes would go back to their families once they discovered they were Aboriginal, only to find that their mother had died 6 months before. But this was a story, I think, that really ignited something in our psyche in Australia, because I think white Australians definitely felt, how would you feel if your child was ripped from your arms and taken away, put somewhere else, you never saw them again? Or if you did, perhaps a lot of your members of your families had died by then. So this kind of brought about a stirring, I think, in the conscience of white Australia. Then came the wonderful apology in 2008 by our former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. And I think this was another defining moment in our history between us. And it built those bridges of coming together and just allowing us to see, you know, what it was. 1 million people, out of our small population, 1 million people walked over bridges in Australia. That was massive. At the Sydney Harbour Bridge, where I was that day, they say 250,000 walked across bridges. Simultaneously, we had walks across bridges all over the country. And we must have thought, well, you know, there's something, whitefellas must be trying to come to terms with something, or, you know, I think for all the Aboriginal people I spoke to, they didn't realise the kind of the goodwill and the, you know, the power of people actually caring about somebody else. So that was a very healing moment for us too. And for reconciliation, it means 3 things to me. It's about recognition. It's about justice. We have to look at all those horrible statistics, get rid of them. And the third thing is about healing. It's how we combine all those things. Right now in our country, we're going through a process of constitutional recognition and reform. This is about including our people in the constitution of our country, because we were never ever included. Now, in 1967, our people who fought for that did a great job, but they didn't change a couple of tricky clauses there. One that says, on the basis of your race, you can discriminate people, you can not allow people from voting. So that means me or any other ethnic minority can be denied voting on the basis of their race. This is the clause that we want to take out of our constitution, and we want to really insert our people in our constitution in a way that we should have been inserted in 1901 in Federation times when the constitution was formed, because as you know, the constitution is the Bible of your country. In that way, I don't know about the Bible, but you know, it's certainly one of the great living laws of the country. So Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal people, we're all fighting for that at the moment. Not all of us, but we're hoping to have this referendum that will say yes, as it did in 1967, when 96% of the Australian population voted yes, that Aboriginal people have the right to citizenship and other things. So we're doing that at the moment. That's our big fight. Our big challenge is to change the constitution of our country. Our people say to us, changing the constitution, how's it going to fix our living conditions? You know, what are we... And they're very fine questions, and they're very good, but we've seen how the symbolic measures can really create a healing component for our country. And sure, you know, everything's not fine, rosy and cosy since the apology, but you know, it's still happened. Unlike countries, New Zealand, Canada and the States, we've never had a treaty in our country. There's never been a treaty, and sometimes people say, the Treaty of Waitangi in New Zealand is not worth the paper it's written on. Well, it might be true, but it's still a bargaining point by which you can leverage some aspects of your injustice to actually work on injustices for your people. But we've never had a treaty as such. Has anybody seen the John Pilger Secret Country video? Probably have, yeah. It says that even back then, John Pilger was he's a social commentator, came to our country. He's well known? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Is he Irish? Well, no. Don't know, yeah. Because he speaks the truth. Yeah. Yes, yeah. And people say, that's still not happening, that's still not there. It is. It's really there. So, yeah, he does, I think he does very good work. So, look, that's I know there's millions of other things I wanted to, there's a thing called Just Vitally too, and then I'd love to have questions and we can have we can have a bit of a yarn. There's this thing called the intervention, Aboriginal intervention, that said Aboriginal people, we'll give them a special law. You know, we'll break the human rights law of our country, and we'll put Aboriginal people, because, you know, they seem to be playing it up and drinking so much and, you know, not managing their money, you know, we're going to take the money off them and give it back to them through tokens that you can buy food and milk at the store, but we'll only do it to Aboriginal communities. That happened in the Northern Territory of our country. It's become a little bit more widespread than now. They're doing it to other populations throughout Australia. But this Northern Territory intervention, it put us back to where my mother was in her mission days. You know, we'd fought and they'd fought for so long to get out of that. That their money was being handled by government. They had to have cards. In those days, you know, you had to have permission slips to move in and out of the missions and reserves. This was a totally denial of the human rights laws in our country. But the Northern Territory intervention is still there. People, I must say, to be honest, it's a little bit mixed, because, you know, some people say, well, maybe, you know, the kids are going to school a bit more, and the money's being spent on food and clothing rather than alcohol and gambling and, you know, all the rest of it. But the majority of people still say it's, you know, it's back to where we started. It's put us back, you know, 50 years or so. So the intervention, where our country says, yes, you can have still 2 laws, but the law is against you, and we will continue on this way. So overall, still not a pretty picture. It's still hard work in the reconciliation process, and trying to get governments and people to understand exactly, you know, the basic rights of our First Nations people, of ourselves, and to enjoy and to acknowledge our rich culture and how we have been there for so long. And now I think even I went to Kevin Rudd invited me to a conference on climate change in New York last month, and it was amazing to see how people really embraced the idea of, you know, how Aboriginal people could live so sustainably in a country for that long, and to nurture it, to take care of it, to, you know, have our ways of fire stick farming and our maintenance of the country. Yet it has been so destroyed through mining activity, through development, through a whole range of things. But they were quite fascinated that, you know, Aboriginal people are still there, and I think we have so much to learn from each other in terms of, you know, how we can fully sustain economies and cultures across the world. And I know, and I'm delighted to be here, because I know that you have had a painful past as well, in a different kind of way, I suppose. Certainly in terms of different ideologies and the way in which people have been oppressed as well here. But you know, I can say that from one oppressed person to another, you know, you just never give up the fight, do you? You just never give up the fight of really trying to build those bridges and try to create that space and that peace. And I think peace, of course, is a global thing. It's a global initiative, as is reconciliation. And reconciliation across the world, I think, has been a fantastic gift for our global economies, for each and every one of us. So thank you. I'm going to be very happy to answer some questions, or if I haven't quite touched on what you'd like to hear, please ask me. Nothing will shock me. So as we say in my language, a greeting word is Wurumuli, and thank you for listening.
Pretty amazing story. Thank you so much, Jackie. So, I'm sure there must be. Yes.
Two questions. What was the population before the white man arrived?
Yeah, good question. It's very debatable. Some historians have put it at 300,000, and others have put it at 1 million.
That's very little for a country that size.
Yeah, we reckon it's about 10 million. No, no, it is, but you know, who knows? It's just yeah. As I said, you know, there were pig, cattle, and sheep, and flora and fauna. Actually, we were under the Flora and Fauna Act before 1967. So all those things were counted before us, before the human beings. So, yeah.
Yeah, the other question is how are you non-white immigrants treated in Australia?
Non-white.
New immigrants.
Yeah, well, Australia prides itself on being a multicultural country, of which it is, you know. I mean, it is, but I think they face the same sorts of prejudices that they do in other countries. But I must say, I think it's much more covert in terms of, you know, things will be mentioned about, particularly Indian cab drivers, you know. They don't know the way and they overcharge you and all the rest of it. That's the latest thing. And our African immigration is quite a bit now in Australia, and you'll hear things too. And there's warfare between Aborigines and Africans, and I can't, for the life of me, understand that, because, you know, when people have come from persecution, people who have lived in persecution, surely you would understand a bit more about that. But our young fellas are really kind of acting out on Africans. We've had, since post-war, a lot of Asian migration. So we've had Vietnamese, Chinese, and when people come to Australia, they say, gee, you've got a lot of Chinese, Asian people here. There are pockets of enclaves of people in places like Cabramatta, in Sydney, where they're quite pronounced. But, you know, I guess it's like anywhere else in the world. You know, people will have their prejudices. There was an issue with Indian students in Melbourne, at Melbourne University a few years ago, and they took to the streets about their treatment. And of course we had the White Australia policy. This was a policy that never allowed non-whites into our country, and it really only opened up probably the 1980s. You know, we're talking really, you can't come into the country if you're Indian or if you. So I never grew up with any Indian people, or we had one Chinese girl in the classroom. Now our country is full of non-whites, because it was only opened up to European races, of course, you know. So we were pretty lonely there for quite some time.
Just recently, the Australian government's under fire because they have banned visas for people coming from the African nations because of Ebola. That's happened in the last few days.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah. But I could see that coming, yeah.
But that makes more sense now after what you just said.
Yes. Yeah, so, and people said a lot of people, I think, consider Australia to be far more laxed in its immigration rules and so forth. I just think it's fascinating.
And also more modern. It seems, as I said to you earlier, it always, in my mind, Australia's one of the modern nations of the world.
Yes, yeah, and it does pride itself on goody two-shoes image and, you know, all the rest of it. But deep down, there's a simmering injustice. But it's, you know, if you came to our country, if you saw us, well, I mean, you know, Kirstine, I must say, I worked with this lovely woman in Reconciliation Queensland when Kirstine was over there, and I'm sure from an outsider's point of view, you would have seen that you come to this country, you think it's all fine and beautiful, and then bang, you know, you're right in the middle of it, and It's
Now I find especially working class white Australian males especially very racist. Very racist.
Excuse me, miss. Uh, you were saying about the Australian people only recently recognised Aboriginal people. You took that as a great victory. And that
sorry, I took that as
did you take that as a great victory that Australia recognised Aboriginal people? I was shocked at that because for me the great victory would be when the Aboriginal people accept the Australian people.
yes, exactly.
Because I think, you know, we had a wonderful day here too one day in the Guildhall Square where the British Prime Minister apologised for mass murder in the streets of this city. And it was a wonderful fiasco. Nothing came out of that. Very similar to the great day of people like lemmings walking across bridges. Do you not look back and say, what was all that foolishness about? When you still today, a lady even of your status is looked down on the streets of Australia, of your country, of which these people have invited themselves to.
Yeah, I do. And Kirsty and I were saying, where have all those people gone? You know, where have all the people who joined us walking over the bridges, and where have they gone? You know, does Australia not care anymore? You know, I know that some went to fight, you know, in the refugees with the refugee stuff, but where are they? So this constitutional question that we have about us, we're not even confident, excuse me, that it'll get up and succeed, because it may not.
But for me, the great victory for Australia will become a nation when the Aboriginal people accept the Australians.
Yes.
When you have your rights.
That's right.
And only then will Australia ever be a nation for me, is when the Aboriginal people say, we now feel empowered, that now we accept all of you people who came to our land. And it doesn't matter if there was 60,000 or 20,000 when the white man, the settlers came. It was your country.
It was.
And that is the reality, and that is the facts. And you as yet have got to accept these people who installed themselves in your land. So that's the victory, that's the reconciliation for me, that when you accept these people and say, now we give you the right to have a passport, the Aboriginal people bless you.
Yes.
So that'll be the victory.
Thank you. It would be too. And you know, White Australia, 227 years of occupation in our country. Okay, yeah, and you're right. We have running along with us. We have our sovereignty movement of people who will always say, and I say, you know, it always was, always will be Aboriginal land. You can't take that away from us, ever. Except now, you know, we got to pay for the land now and pay rent and all the rest of it. You know, we used to have this campaign about, why don't white fellas pay the rent on this land for us? You know, and the 80s were brilliant, and you know, and in my radical days, very radical days, it was just it was fabulous. But we, you know, I guess it's like all everywhere. We've kind of gone a bit. We kind of haven't lost that radicalism amongst us, but we kind of, it's a bit more kind of, what's the word, materialistic, it's not really, but what's the word I'm searching for? Pragmatic, yeah, could be pragmatic. But people just, you know, I don't know about you and your country, but our university students don't even protest anymore. You know, same here. You know, where's the will? Where's the fight gone? Pardon? Apathy, that's what it is.
People went over the bridges. I did say the lemons.
Yeah.
That's where they go. You know, people can be hypnotised into this great apology thing.
Yes.
But where's the substance of an apology?
That's right.
Where's the justice? Where's the truth? Where's the recognition
Exactly.
of your nation's right to invite those people there?
Yes, that's right. And when we do now, we do the welcomes to country and acknowledgements and stuff, and it's been a very it's been quite a coup in our. People don't want us to do it. They just say, "Oh, what are you doing that for?" But you know, it's very important for us to say, yeah, okay, you're welcome here at the moment and safe passage, but please leave and go in peace. You know, yeah, don't stay here.
Could you say something about how Aboriginal people organise to achieve more influence? Do you join a particular political party or try to infiltrate other institutions where you might achieve influence, like the media?
Yeah, all of those. In fact, we had our own passport once. Well, some they still have. You know, there's an Aboriginal provincial government which has its own passports. Sovereignty. Sovereignty is very high within that. In our country, we've just had our first Aboriginal woman in Parliament. First Aboriginal woman and as a senator in the federal Parliament. One only. Yeah, we've had one, and we'll have our first Aboriginal man in the House of Representatives, so that's the big one. Political representation is very low, negligible really, except in parts of, well, Northern Territory we've got about 8 politicians there because it has a very high Aboriginal population up that way. But in terms of, there's the First Nations Party that's been started in Central Australia, but they get very little traction, they get very little resources, you know, and then even our own people say, why be bothered, you know, we're not going to get far with that, why don't we just join Labor or Liberal National Party. So in the civil rights movement days, there were a couple of very feisty organisations of which my mother had belonged to. It was called One People of Australia League, and if you know American history, it's like the NACCP, which is the National Coloured People's Association. They fought for the referendum and getting us the vote, and well, the vote came, no, Australians think we got the vote in 1967, well it wasn't. We had it in very obscure ways. If you went away and fought in the military you could vote, or if you own land you could vote. But voting came very, very late for most Aboriginal people. Around the 1965 really you could say that Aboriginal voting rights had appeared. But the parties that we have, like here, I'm sure in your country, we can't tell the difference now between the left and the right, you know, because there's no right. Certainly the party that we have in now, federal government through Tony Abbott, they make all the nice words and the promises and so forth, but in terms of reality, do they do it? Not really. You know? So we have very few people in media, very few presenters as well. But I don't know that you know of an American woman called Jane Elliott. She did some work on race relations, brown eyes, blue eyes. Yeah? The brown eyes, blue eyes thing. And she said, I couldn't do it with Aboriginal people because a lot of you got blue and green eyes. Well, yeah, and they have through their European ancestors. But she said, it just amazes me so much. You're just 2% of the population and how you can terrorise the rest of Australia. I think it's about a guilty conscience. I think it's about, you know, not owning the truth or standing up to the truth. And that's what we try to do in terms of the history of our country, is get people to understand, you know, the full breach of how it was and where we've come from. And you've got to learn all the unpalatables like you do in your own country in order for you to grow. So, sorry sir, just in terms of the political representation, it's very minimal. They do make loud noises though, the two that are in Parliament now. They, Nova Peris, who's our senator, was an Olympic hockey player and runner. She was a sprinter. And you've heard of Cathy Freeman? Cathy ran for all of us, I think, all oppressed people in the world that day when she won the Olympic medal for all of us. People have asked Cathy to go into politics, but I don't think she's open to the idea. But yes, but you know, political representation is very low, and we just because we're 2%, we're such a small minority of the population. Sometimes our vote just doesn't count, and then our young people say, "Oh, why do we register anyway? Because we're not going to vote." You know, yeah, we were not going to get anywhere. So there's a very large degree of apathy. But then again, you know, with our young people coming up through as well, if we took in reconciliation in our country, we took a poll one time, and young people who agreed with it were up here, and the older people were here. So it's saying, you know, we probably, it's looking pretty promising, but you know, and we're not going to win with some of the old dinosaurs. They're going to have to, you know, go away and leave us. But we can work on, you know, those younger people that we've got, and we have a new curriculum, a national curriculum, where Aboriginal studies now has to be taught in schools. And as a young woman, I advocated for that for a very, very long time. And it's one of my dreams to see a national curriculum with Aboriginal studies being taught in schools now. And that's open to debate about what do you teach, how's it going to be taught, you know, is it the truth? That's another can of worms, yeah. But at least now they have no reason never to say, well, I didn't know about the stolen generation or the apology or reconciliation, or they have to teach massacres, around the massacres, the war, the poisonings, the shootings and stuff. They have to teach that, but they may gloss over. We don't know what teachers will teach in their schools, but they may gloss over that.
And that's literally only in the last year.
Yeah, only in the last year.
It was a hidden history before that.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Nobody
Matt
knew.
there from Sudbury wouldn't have heard about it when he was in school. You know, you maybe wouldn't have been taught about the history.
No.
As you said, the poisonings and the massacres and everything, just wouldn't have been taught, wouldn't have been talked about.
We learnt more about the kings and queens of England and Scotland than we ever did. We didn't even know where Ireland was, but no, we did. But we learnt about, and that's one thing I think Australia maybe does do a bit, pretty good, you know, that we do learn. Well, I love geography and history and learn about other countries. When I go to America, people say, you know a lot about us and we hardly know anything about you. And I say, yeah, because we had to learn about you. So, you know, education's so important, of course, in schools. As a kid, you get really defined and shaped by your learnings as a little fella, you know.
Would there be high educational under-attainment with the Aboriginal young people at the moment, or do you see that getting better, or is it worse, or not the same?
In some places, because our people still speak language in the north, bilingual programs are being cut. And still, if we look at it on an average, we're still way below, way down on the 8 ball in terms of our educational attainments, which is really sad, very sad.
Because that could be the key for bringing up a new generation of activists and politicians. You know?
Yes. And when I was at university, I mean, I worked with the cream of the crop, you know. I was fortunate to see those wonderful young people who are going to be leaders and are going to attain, but sadly, you know, there's the majority of our people, unfortunately, are not like that.
Do you have any other questions? Yes.
I remember reading Bruce Chatwin's songlines and his perhaps appropriation of something that I found the most mind-blowing concept about time and the dream time, and how that tied up with art, which also resonated with sound. I've never quite received anything as almost modern, actually, in its understanding of quantum physics and how our material universe really is. And I'm so desperately looking for an Aboriginal voice that owns that as their territory and makes it accessible to someone like me. Because Dreamtime kind of reminds me of Tirnanog, which is land of the forever young.
Right.
And that's just, you know, Aboriginal people are not bringing that to the table, but you might get white middle class people, as they always do, appropriating other people's culture and running off with the glory. And that really annoys me, actually, you know, bang.
Yeah.
So can you recommend anyone that's...
A woman called Alexis Wright.
Alexis Wright?
Yeah,
Is
Alexis.
that W-R-I-G-H-T?
Yeah. There's a book she's written called Carpentaria. Carpentaria.
Can I come to you at the end
Yes,
so I can
please,
write
yeah.
it down because I'm a
Actually,
bit...
there's a number of them. There's a couple of because
And women too?
and women too. Yes. I also happen to be the patron. I'm a patron of three things. Maybe because I'm getting more grey hair. Of the First Nations Aboriginal Writers Network in Australia. So I can give you a whole list of.
I would love
We will
to.
speak to that, but
Because
in our way.
you've got painting, the visual arts, you've got
Yes,
sound,
yes.
you've got dimensions to do with time,
Yes.
and it is so
Wonderful.
complex
Yeah.
and so modern,
Yep. Yep.
astounding.
Mhm.
What did you think of Bruce Chatwin? Did you think that was a bit of a songlines? He wrote songlines in Patagonia.
It's kind of like, not in the depth that I see song lines.
Right, yes,
You know, a bit like some of you might have heard of Sally Morgan.
yes.
Sally Morgan, everyone's read Sally Morgan, but that was kind of a bit of a gammon book too.
I know
Modern
Peter
Feminine.
Weir sort of flirted with sort of otherness in the film Picnic at Hanging Rock.
Yes,
It was very strange and
yeah.
captivating.
Mm.
You know,
Did you talk about rabbit-proof fence? Did anybody see that? The rabbit-proof fence? That's when the little girls walked. It's a Stolen Generation film where three little girls walked 1,500 kilometres to find their mother, who was in another part of the country, and they were put onto a little. Yeah, Follow the Rabbit-Proof Fence. There's a book out by Doris Pilkington anyway. I'll give you all those, yeah, she wrote about that too.
I was taken as a child by all things Australian. Jenny Agutter and Walkabout with Fingerbone.
Yeah,
I remember going, oh,
yeah.
fascinating.
Sorry, Kevin.
Going off this sort of talking about art, I remember very clearly when I was at high school, when I would have been about 16, there was a module of like an art class where you do an Aboriginal art, and it was all dots, coloured dots. But that was really my kind of primary introduction to that culture. And it was only, I've learned things today that I've never even, heard of before. And I wonder whether there might be an issue of that kind of cultural politics masking the economic politics there, or the demographic politics. So do you think that there might be an issue where the cultural politics is cloaking perhaps other issues that ought to take priority?
Can you give me an example? I'm not quite sure of your specific question, but I just want to tell you, the dots were invented by a white fella who worked out at Yuendamu Aboriginal Mission. He started doing the dot paintings. His name was Barden, and he taught Aboriginal people. And then it spread like wildfire, and people were talking about, this means all that. But sorry.
Well, maybe I can explain it by comparing it to modern history here, where there would be a school of thought who would argue that the conflict was an economic one, in a sense, the way that that there was a certain level of falseness in the opposition between the two cultures when within both sort of halves, as it were, there was a kind of economic top layer. And it seems like the concentration on cultural and issues masks and cloaks those things. And I wonder whether that problem is a presence in Australia.
Yeah, certainly I think in the artistic field, yes, very much. Oh, and even in terms of, our people have real difficulty in terms of weighing up Do you give over your land, which is the essence of all thing, to mining rights? Do you let go of your native title rights, which are your inherent rights from the country you come from, to so-called economic development? That's a real issue that we grapple with in our country. In terms of the artistic world, yes, of course. I mean, you know, I've just been to that fabulous museum in Paris, where they've got the barramundi on the, and I can't even pronounce it because I don't speak French, Museum de Quale Braille or something. Anyway, anybody else know it? But anyway, but yeah, and you know, throughout our history too, we've had our carpetbaggers in terms of the people who've wanted to seek, exploit and destroy our art and forms of artwork. But you know, economically, and our people, you know, there's an old man in the desert. He sold his painting one day to a fella for $100. It was sold in a overseas museum for $1 million. You know, there's stories like that all over our country of people being ripped off in that session, in that certain way. So, look, I think economics and culture have always been riddled with complexities of. It's very hard to navigate, you know, which way is best for your community and for yourself as well, and your family and your individual. Because we're all tied up in our communities. We're individuals, yes, but our communities come first in terms of everything that we do. And economics is a big factor that's played a huge role in modern Australia, modern contemporary Australia, in the way that we look after our communities and foster them.
I'm just comparing the similarities to your story and our story. I just said to my husband there, when I was at school, I knew the Pennine chain was the backbone of England, but I didn't know Dublin was the capital of Ireland.
Listen, I think this conversation could go on all afternoon. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear your story, and a real privilege as well. You know, it's as I said earlier, it's so unexpected, and it's so serendipitous as well, because, you know, we've just been so lucky to have you here today, and it ties in with a lot of things that we're doing, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your trip to Ireland. I know you're doing a walk around the walls today, which you'll love. And hopefully you'll come back and we can hear from you again, and I'm sure everyone here will be following with more interest the work that Reconciliation Queensland are doing. And you know, there's a long road, as we know ourselves, in this country. It's a long road, but you know, you have to keep chipping, keep moving. And listen, thank you so much, Jackie, and just get Jackie in.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for listening.